Well, hello everybody, and as we are wont to say in YouTube land, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm doing a walkthrough and review video, a point of view walkthrough and review video. It's the first one of these that I've done for quite some time, so bear with me. I may well be a bit rusty, but hopefully it will all work out. And the deck that I'm going to be reviewing today is a deck by the wonderful Cilla Conway, who is the creator of a number of different decks. This one here, the Intuitive Tarot, is one that I have already reviewed and walked through on my channel. I'll link that below. She also collaborated with John Matthews on this deck, the Byzantine Tarot, or Byzantine Tarot. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that, but that's a very interesting deck, and Cilla did the artwork for that deck. You can see some of the wonderful images there on the front. But today, the deck we're going to be looking at is this one, the multi-dimensional DEVAS deck. And those of you who are familiar with Cilla's work will probably recognize the style of art that you see there. Let me just move these other decks out of the way so that I have some room. And those of you who've got some of Cilla's other decks will recognize this style of art, particularly her previous oracle deck, the DEVAS of Creation, and also another tarot deck of hers, the 𝙤𝙤𝙣 Tarot, which is an absolutely beautiful deck. She's working on two other decks, by the way, the Book of the Dead Oracle, which she hopes will be out next year, and also the Old Gods Tarot. And actually, I should say that on the day that I'm recording this review and walkthrough, it's the day after Cilla and I had a marvellous conversation together on Zoom, which I have recorded and which I'm going to be sharing with you in a separate video, which will go up after this one, either well, maybe later today or in a day or two. So watch for that, and please excuse the wobbly camera. I'm using an old kind of camera arm for this because I can't find my more modern one. So it'll be fine. We're going to work through this and it's going to be fine. So let's just say a little bit before we go into the actual deck about DEVAS. So some of you may be aware of what DEVAS are, some of you perhaps not. DEVAS actually comes from a Sanskrit word DEVAS, which is a word that means the kind of intelligent spirit behind all things, if you like, all certainly all living things. The word Deva I first came across in relation to a woman called Dorothy McLean, who is one of the founders of the Findhorn Foundation in Scotland, a wonderful place. I've been there a number of times, a very special place to me. And she was one of the people who founded the original caravan park in Scotland, on the very sandy northeast coast of Scotland. In the 1960s, there was all kinds of stories of how amazing it was that this caravan park, which grew into a garden, was managing to grow some really amazing specimens of vegetables, huge vegetables. And people were kind of puzzled as to how this was, because the soil there isn't terribly fertile. And what Dorothy McLean and the other founders of Findhorn, Peter Caddy and Eileen Caddy, who were a married couple at that time, said was they were doing this in co-creation with nature. And in fact, Dorothy McLean was communicating directly with the devas of the vegetables and plants in the garden. Now, what I'll also do is I'll post a link to a video of Dorothy McLean below, speaking about her first experience of contacting this informing spirit of the Deva, of the garden pea. In fact, that was the first plant that she connected with. So she talks about that in this video. So I'll link that below so that you have a sense of what that's all about. So that's what I understood Devas to be. That's when I first heard of them. And so it was really fascinating to speak to Cilla in our conversation about her experience of Devas. And of course, she had previously created a deck called the DEVAS of Creation back in 2004, and this is a kind of a follow-on deck to that. So we'll talk a little bit about you know, what this deck is about specifically. But just to show you, this is the box. Well, actually, here's the box, the lid and the main part of the box. Beautifully packaged, lovely solid kind of packaging, and very well put together. You know, with lots of interesting details on the back. I'll come to that in a second. What I wanted to show you here is that in the inside of this box, you actually have a little plan both of this deck, the multi-dimensional Devas, which is here, but also the Devas of creation, and you can see how the Devas of creation and this deck connect and relate to one another. Now, one of the things that Cilla has said is that you don't need to have the Devas of creation, the first deck, in order to make use of this one. They are complementary, they work well together, but you certainly don't need them. But just look at this kind of schematic here. Just already you can see how beautiful and colourful and well, how interesting the art is. It's clearly very kind of intuitively inspired art. Some of it's quite abstract, some of it a bit more specific looking, and certainly at first glance to me looks really interesting. So we're going to come back to that and to the structure of this deck in a second, but let's just have a quick look at what Cilla herself says in the box, or on the box. So this is the back of the box, and it gives you a bit of details of what it is that you can expect in this deck. So here she says, explore the multi-dimensional universe. The long-awaited companion deck to the Devas of creation, the multi-dimensional Devas, is a 48 card set that takes you on a journey into the simplest of dimensions, a dot in the void. That's that, spoiler alert. Through the increasing complexity of the 2nd to 10th dimensions into the unimaginable illumination of the 11th, which is cosmic consciousness. And cosmic consciousness is the one that appears on the front of the box. Isn't that gorgeous? Just lovely colours and energy and marvellous. If you have ever wished you could explore the higher dimensions, here's where you can begin. Like the Devas of creation, the multi-dimensional Devas explore the different creative energies that underpin our universe. In this deck, the focus is on the different dimensions and the qualities needed now and in the future, such as trust, perception, stillness and authenticity. Shadow energies like hubris and greed are depicted, while other global issues, for instance climate change and the global pandemic, have become so acute that it is possible the Devas themselves are finally taking a hand, forcing us to look at real solutions. Thus, in the final cards, we are offered an alternative to our current paradigm and the ways we could renew our humanity and our world. How to heal the earth, move up into the higher dimensions and be introduced to future generations. We are offered a glimpse into the possible human. And finally, move through into a space we might seek out, wonder about or run from. Through the veil. So that gives you a sense of what the deck is about, and here it tells you what you get. 48 cards, each one is an artwork in its own right, and you have a 129 page book with information on how to work with the Devas and detailed interpretations of the cards. Now, one of the things I want to just suggest, and this is just a suggestion, you do not have to take my suggestion. If you get this deck, it's your deck to explore as you will. I think it's rather wonderful to look at the cards and get a sense of what you think they mean before you go into the detail of what the book says they mean, just to see whether you can find any commonality. My experience when I went through this deck on my own for the first time, and I looked at the images first, I tried to figure out, not so much figure out, I tried to notice what my response to the images was, and you know, each time I took a card and looked at it and responded to the image and then checked out the meaning in the book, I won't say that I always found that my understanding was the same as what Cilla had expressed in the book, but very often it was extremely close. And even when it wasn't the same, I found that the kind of dynamism between my interpretations and Cilla's intentions really added to the richness of the experience. So that's my little plug, that you give yourself the opportunity to do that. Now you'll see these cards are gilded. I haven't worked with these very much yet. I don't tend to riffle shuffle, I tend to overhand shuffle, and they are quite large for my hand, but they shuffle very well, and I found them quite easy to shuffle. Nice cardstock, not too thick, nice kind of matte finish with a little bit of shine on them just to keep them looking pristine. Gorgeous colouring. They looks to me, I mean obviously I haven't seen the original paintings, but you can see in this one, just look at the texture in that image. You know, it's almost three-dimensional, so the reproduction of the images is absolutely fantastic. So I think really we should waste no more time and start having a look at the cards. Oh, actually, before we look at the cards, I want to just show you the book, just to say that they are gilded. I've got a light shining on here, but look at that lovely illumination. It's a nice gilding. It feels very good quality gilding. I don't think that will chip very easily. Only time will tell, of course. So before we go on to the details of the card, let me just quickly give you a sense of what you'll find in the book, because you know, Cilla has written something here that I think is an absolutely wonderful exploration of the cards, and really a kind of interesting spiritual treatise in its own right. So what you find in here is information about who and what are the devas. You have an index of the cards. There's a bit in there about the differences and similarities between the devas of creation, if you have that deck, and the multi-dimensional devas. And then you have the suggested card interpretations. And I like that Cilla's put here suggested. So she too is kind of open to and responsive to the idea that really this kind of intuitive artwork should be about sparking intuition and senses within ourselves. So give yourself the opportunity to do that. Some information about how to use the deck and sample readings, and then a whole set of fantastically interesting appendices, information about the devas and how they connect to the quantum realms. So this notion of some of these ancient mystical philosophies and modern quantum science coming together, and various other appendices which are really, really interesting. And there's some really good introductory information here. So, as I've mentioned to you, the devas comes from a Sanskrit word pronounced DEVAS, and Cilla describes them here as primordial energies, invisible energy patterns in the universe, which contain the blueprints for every aspect of existence, from the smallest subatomic particle to the universe itself. And Dorothy McLean, you'll see in the video I post below, says something quite interesting, that when she contacted the deva of the pea plant, she recognized that she wasn't contacting a spirit of that particular plant. She was contacting a kind of group soul, a group intelligence that linked all of that kind of plant together. What Cilla mentions here is that Sanskrit philosophers writing about the devas thousands of years ago called them the shining ones. To these ancient Vedic scholars, they were gods such as Indra, god of the heavens, Shiva, creation and destruction, and Vayu, wind. The feminine, Devi, were goddesses, or Devi perhaps, were goddesses such as Parvati, power and love, and Durga, victory. And then she talks a bit about how science is beginning to open up to the idea of this kind of collective energy behind the universe and behind different parts of the universe. She talks a bit about her introduction to the devas and different ways of connecting. So there's a bit of history there about how she came to tarot and also how she came to the devas, and she talks a bit about that in the conversation I have with her, so I won't repeat all of that here. What I will simply do is encourage you to watch that when it comes out. Now here you have a planogram of the deck, and you'll see that the deck is divided into different sections, and you know, the subtitle is Explore the Multi-Dimensional Universe, the 11 dimensions of creation. That's the 11 dimensions of creation is what's on the front of the book, and what you have here is information about those dimensions, or rather segments of the dimensions. So the first 6 dimensions are the first 6 cards. The next 5 cards take you up to the 11th dimension. Then you have the angelic realm here. Then the devas themselves and the archetypes are the cards 13 to 18. Then we have the inner states cards, the physicality cards, the mind and the shadow cards. This one's interesting, and we'll come on to that when we get there. Asuras and the last story, and then breaking through. Now, what I particularly like about, and I mentioned this to Cilla when we spoke, I like about the fact that she's included physicality and the mind and the shadow, is that in a sense, this is where we are. We're in the physical, apparent physical realm of matter, and we have a mind, and we know that our minds can be great servants to us, but they can also get us into all kinds of trouble. And there's a recognition here that the physical world, you know, is part of the picture, and there are other elements and aspects that we can explore, and they're set out here. Now what we also have here is the page numbers for each of the cards, so you can reference the cards. Let me just quickly say that the cards themselves don't have titles on them. We'll come on to that in a second, but they do have numbers very subtly at the bottom so that you can easily find the card. So you'll see, for example, that that first one is the first dimension, the second one is the second dimension, and they appear on those pages, so you can easily find them. I like the fact that these cards don't have names on them, partly because, you know, sometimes I do like oracle cards to have names on them, but I like the fact that these don't, because they're such intuitively based images and artwork that I like the fact that I'm not being told, I'm being told by nothing other than the image what they mean until I look it up. So, you know, I got immediately that this was the void, or the beginning of something in the void, and then I understood that the second card related to, you know, you go from 1 to 2, you've got this plane of existence, you've got 2 dimensions now, so you can have a flat surface. So I got that. It's not quite as straightforward as the deck goes on, of course, but I'm glad that it didn't just tell me that on the card in words. So what I'll just show you quickly is the format of each of the entries. So let's just pick one at random. So here we have card 22, manifestation. You see the image of the card, you have the number of the card and the name, and then you have Cilla's description of what it is she has here, and also some musings on what this all means. So for manifestation, she says, a richly garbed figure rests in a meditative pose against what could be a green and cerise carpet. The patterns of the carpet are almost symmetrical, though not quite. That not quite perfection allows the figure to connect through to the creative energies in the universe and weave the fabric of her or his dreams. And then she talks about, you know, the myths of weaving in different mythologies and so on, the meaning of manifestation and so on, and then what needs to come after manifestation. The next step, equally important, is to take physical steps to manifest the dream. You know, it's funny that I've opened up to this one because, you know, I've literally just finished teaching a couple of weeks ago a course on tarot coaching where manifestation and the process of manifestation was a really big topic. And this is exactly the kind of thing I said, you know, that it's all very well having these wonderful manifestation ideas and putting our psychic energy into them, if you like, but we've got to take the practical physical steps too. You're not a passive recipient here, you're an active partner. So for instance, if you'd like to retrain for a new career, start to research where courses are held and attend open days. If you can, talk to tutors and students. So I'll read this because this just absolutely chimes with me. Whatever happens, we will be given what our soul needs, not what we think we want. It will be something that transforms as we grow. So very positive, but straight talking kind of information here, and that's how Cilla is. You'll see this in the discussion that we have. One of the things I really love about Cilla's work is that it's very in line with how she is, and if you speak to her, this is the kind of information that you would get from her. Then we have some information about suggested interpretations about the card and some space for your own notes. So again, if you go through the process as I suggest of responding to the images first, here's where you could jot down your first impressions and then your impressions as you get to know the deck a bit better. And that's the format for all of the cards in the deck. And then, as I say, we then move into other areas where we learn about using the multi-dimensional devas. We have some examples of client readings, which is really interesting and useful because Cilla uses these cards in her reading practice as well. We have a number of spreads, including short Celtic spread with the devas. Obviously this isn't a tarot deck, but this is a tarot influenced spread, and Cilla certainly knows her stuff when it comes to tarot, so not surprising that that would be in there. And then we have some information about interesting science-based and mystical-based stuff, the conscious universe, cosmic consciousness and the universe. Then I mentioned there's the appendices. Here we are, the fallen angels, story of the two wolves. I'm not giving this all away simply because I want you to get this deck and explore it and, you know, understand it for yourself. But there's some interesting stuff in here, as well as a wonderful bibliography at the end, information to read and to watch to learn a bit more about all the stuff that went into influencing Cilla in the creation of this deck. So, okay, let me just take a sip of water. And we will start to go through the deck. Now, what I'm going to suggest that we do, or that I do rather, you just need to sit back and listen and relax and enjoy. Hang on, let me get these a bit more neatly arranged. Let me do that. And let me zoom in a bit. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through these cards. I'll talk about the first few in a bit more detail, simply because they outline the first 11 dimensions, and that's what the deck is based on, the 11 dimensions of creation. And then I'm going to let my own intuition guide me here, and occasionally I'm not going to go through each card in detail, but I'll tell you what each card is. So if you don't want to know the names of these cards, by the way, mute the video or turn off the subtitles so that you don't have any spoilers. If you don't mind knowing, I'll go through the detail of what these cards are, what they actually are called, and then every so often I'll stop with one of them and we'll go into it in a bit of depth and a bit of detail. So yeah, let's get started. So this is dimension number 1. And as I mentioned, this is the beginning of things. This is the first dimension, something appearing in the void. So let me just read you what Cilla says about this card. The image of the first dimension shows a black background and in the centre a pale blue dot. This can be seen as nothing more than a small one-dimensional point, but looked at from a different perspective, it is much more than this. Somewhere at the outer edges of the spiral galaxy we call the Milky Way, this small blue dot reveals itself as a planet, our Earth. The closer we come to it, the more it reveals. The blue is of oceans, liquid water, which, as far as we know, is not found elsewhere in our universe, within which swim immense intelligent sea creatures. In the thin layer of atmosphere above the seas, birds and insects wheel, dive and sing. On the 5 land masses, dissected by mountains, deserts and rainforests, live many extraordinary creatures, including a species we call human. Wondrously intelligent, these beings have expanded past the planet's ability to easily contain them, but instead of reflecting on this, they are busy attempting to make space for themselves by killing off every other living thing, including the trees that keep the planet habitable. We have always wondered why there has been no contact from the myriad of other worlds in the immensity of space. Perhaps they are waiting to see if we can survive the challenge to grow into full consciousness. To return to the first dimension, let me just pause here. So that was Cilla. This is me speaking now. What I love about this is, as I mentioned, my first response to this wasn't to think, oh, that's planet Earth. It was to think, well, this must be the first dimension. The first dimension is a dot. I spoke about some of this in my own Tarot to the 9 series, where I looked at tarot through the lens of number. And of course, different numbers symbolise different parts of the process of creation. So the dot, which you might relate to the card, the Magician, is something, matter beginning to manifest out of the nothing, the Fool. You might say here, the nothing is this black background, and the something is this. And as well as reminding one of the planet Earth, what it might also remind one of is the first particle that explodes out into the Big Bang, the beginning of creation. And what I love about this is it represents that kind of process. It also represents Earth, which is where we find ourselves, and where we find ourselves is certainly the origin point of our own individual creations. Our experience of life starts here and now, in this moment, at this time and in this place. But it also can represent the concept of the beginning of things, and it begs some questions. So if this is the beginning of everything, the beginning of time and space and matter and all that kind of stuff, what's all this? What is the nothingness that something comes from? And the mystical traditions talk about everything being both everything the world of phenomenal things, and also being nothing. So you hear this in Buddhism and Zen and Taoism and Advaita Vedanta and sort of more modern non-dual theories and systems like A Course in Miracles and so on talk about the same kind of thing, the idea of something coming from nothing. And it's represented so simply and so clearly here. So Cilla continues, to return to the first dimension. Here, a dot has no depth, height, width, it's just a dot. It ought to show us how wrong our perception can be. After all, the closer we get to our beautiful blue planet, the more we realise it is not just a dot, but an entire world, and we certainly don't live purely in the first dimension. Having said that, our intelligence and self-awareness is both miraculous and simultaneously unbelievably limited. And then she goes on to suggested interpretations. If you draw this card, think of it as a wake-up call. We get them every now and again as a blessing from some phenomenal conscious entity. And then she recommends we see card number 11, Cosmic Consciousness. We'll get to that. That's the last one, the 11th dimension. Such a wake-up call often arises from a global catastrophe, such as the coronavirus outbreak. Will we wake up now, I wonder? So at the very least, the card is about a rethink. You may well have been ignoring indications that you're on the wrong track, or maybe some new thought has been waiting for you to become aware of it. What are your entrenched concepts? Have friends suggested ideas to you which you've shrugged off without further thought? Almost all of us have developed views about ourselves and our world, politics, work, friends, many of which have become set in stone. It's now time to question each one of them. So, lots of information in the book, lots of information you can glean even from this simplest of cards, especially if you remind yourself of what you might already know about the meaning of number and the progression of number and the meaning of symbols and space, etc., etc. So there's a lot of richness in this imagery. So let's move on now to the next one, and I'm going to go through these a bit more quickly. I won't read everything that's in the book, but I'll give you an overview of these dimensional cards. So the second dimension. The second dimension is visualized as a horizontal line in space. No height or width, no space, just a line. I have used one of my paintings to illustrate this as a coloured band across the card, while below I've also shown an unusual perspective of the painting. Paintings are, of course, produced on a flat two-dimensional surface, which we view from our three-dimensional world, usually adding the 3 dimensions in our imagination. But what if we had no concept of height or breadth? And then in terms of suggested interpretations, she indicates that this card poses a series of questions. She references a concept called the Flatlanders, that's inhabitants of a 2D world, which a speaker called Thad Thomas uses as a kind of analogy for the way that the universe works and how we might see things if we could only operate in 2 dimensions. So Cilla asks us here, how free do you feel from society, from old family issues, from your education? If you believe that you cannot change your life, you are just limiting yourself, like a flatlander. So some interesting observations and concepts there. Then we move to the third dimension, and what we have here is this marvellous kind of triangular image, and Cilla says, against a multicoloured background floats a turquoise blue sphere, in front of which are 2 triangles, enclosing a man, a woman and a child. The standard nuclear family, which as a closed system does not always result in the healthiest of families. Held enclosed within these limiting triangles, these individuals do not look particularly happy. This may be our own dimension and all we know, but if the figures look up, they'll see that there may be ways out of this apparent prison. I should add that the sensory world around us is something even the angels envy, so she's not indicating that being in this dimension is bad, but is indicating that there's more to it. Then she talks about the symbolism of the triangle, and she also talks about the work of the physicist John Wheeler. And here's what she says about this. One of the foremost contemporary physicists, John Wheeler, said that we need to participate in the universe, and there's a reference to his work later in the book. We always have choices. We can choose to think that we were somehow dumped in this 3-dimensional prison, Or we can consider that this is our gift from cosmic consciousness, which offers us to smells, sight, taste, and physical bliss of the world for the short time we have here. It's up to us to discover what we can offer to our world, whether physically, mentally, or spiritually. Or maybe not. We all have unique gifts to share, although unfortunately many people don't believe this. Suggested interpretations of the card: good time and place to acknowledge your physical existence, to make the most of it, but to think about how you view physicality. Do you revel in it or wish you could reject it? And that's a key question, she says, because to move up into the higher dimensions, you need to accept this one fully. Moving on. Wow, just look at that. That's just an explosion of colour. You know, I'm kind of reminded of what we hear in Taoism. Let me just put these in a row. I can't remember. I can never remember the quote exactly, but there is a quote that goes something like, from nothing comes something. The one gives birth to the two gives birth to the three, and the three gives birth to the 3,000 things, or 1,000 things, or 10,000 things. I can never remember the exact numbers, but it's something like that. And certainly in Tarot to the Nines, I spoke about the Empress card being that pivotal point in creation where all of a sudden fecundity and fertility bursts forth. And you see this with all this colour now that you are past that third point. You've been at point 3 and you've now moved into this explosion of reality. So let's see what Cilla says about the fourth dimension. Starting at the bottom of the image, we see a number of people, some hand in hand, walking up a long straight path that appears to move vertically as it moves away from us. On either side of this path are globular hills, or perhaps different worlds. On the right we catch a glimpse of mountains. On the left there are glimpses of enormous clocks. Other globes float up towards the top third of the image, where there is a dazzling array of light and colour surrounded by a semicircular orange aura and a bright scintillating radiance that might be the sun, or a sun in a different time. The fourth dimension is said to be where time, rather than 3D space, becomes paramount. Nowadays we are governed by biological time, the knowledge that our lives are finite, and by atomic time. Thousands of years ago, humans were more likely to live in the present moment, their lives governed by the survival needs. When the cerebral cortex developed, we started to look consciously into the future and wonder about what if. Time began to take conscious shape for us, not only in the past but also the future, and thus became fixed as a concept. Now our challenge is usually to stay in the here and now, appreciating every second. And she talks about how sages and shamans travel freely through the fourth dimension, and the suggested interpretations here are a possible move into a different plane of existence, and other interpretations can be about time itself and what it means to us. It may be that we feel pressure to keep up, to perform, to be with it for every moment of the day, and it's a reminder to breathe and to take time out. Okay, so let's move quickly through the rest of these dimensions so we can get on to the rest of the card. Fifth dimension, this is where we begin to encounter the variety of energies that surround and hold us. We begin to encounter parallel worlds like the Devic worlds and other beings. The fifth dimension is a bridge between the physical and the non-physical, a dimension outside of time where we encounter archetypes, the collective consciousness of humankind and animals, and their higher energetic fields, which some call the etheric body. And this is where we might see chakras and wheels of light and so on. So, drawing this card, thinking about unseen energies around us. And she makes the point that the energies around us are not only devas. When things go wrong, it can sometimes seem as if some dark fate is stalking you. If you begin to experience a series of unaccountable accidents, it may be that negative energies are surging around you. Our etheric body is susceptible to certain inimical energies at particular times or from certain people, and that can snowball. So she's asking, she's reminding us it's our responsibility to realise how we've allowed such attacks to manifest. What are we repressing, and are we blaming outside forces instead of acknowledging our own avoidance? So reminding us that we can tap into positive kind of realms as well. Let me just zoom in a little bit more so you can see more of the detail. That may be too far. I want you to see the wholeness of the cards. So that is the fifth dimension. There was a group called the fifth dimension, I think, was there not? The sixth dimension. Sorry, excuse my hand. It is still possible in the sixth dimension to experience both the physical structure underlying the universe and the many different realms which we can access here. But here she also starts talking about the underlying structures, the spiral in the universe. This is the mathematical formula we know as the golden section, the fundamental proportions seen throughout the universe. Don't be tempted to think that this mathematical ratio indicates that the universe is predictable and safe, however. That idea was always erroneous. Even the golden section is based on mathematical calculations that scientists later dubbed chaos theory, which states that there are underlying structures even in the most apparently chaotic systems, but also that a tiny alteration in one system can have an enormous effect in another. For instance, a butterfly flapping its wings in China might cause a hurricane in Texas. And there's a bit in the book, just so you're aware, where she's got some example images of the golden section and goes into it with some details of the proportions and so on. So this card is about maintaining balance and keeping everything in proportion. But she also points out there are times when it's appropriate to add 1 and 1 and get 5. So we're into quite creative space at this point. Seventh dimension. Now, what's your first response to that when you see it? This is an interesting one because I see two things at least here. I'll read you what we have from Cilla. An enormous tree, its white and cerise blossoms glowing, reaches high into the heavens. A curved bridge of light separates earth from sky, while in the stratosphere above a multitude of worlds are depicted as bubbles. In the centre, a powerful beam of light slices through the arc of the rainbow bridge. And then she talks about the role of trees and the fact that they are the bridge between heaven and earth in a number of mythologies. The Norse myth, of course, has the rainbow bridge where the gods ascend to Valhalla. There's the Kalpa tree, which is about connections to the thoughts, the connection of thought to the divine. Yggdrasil from the Norse tree of life, the Banyan tree in Buddhism, Hinduism and Jain mythologies. And then the Bible, memorably and regrettably, introduces its version as the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And she talks also about children's stories, the faraway tree from children's author Enid Blyton, and the role that trees take and portray in films like Avatar. Lots of information about the ancient symbolism as trees, and also 7 being seen as a celestial number. Now, the other thing I see here, and it just struck me really just now as watching it, is a mushroom cloud. But this is weird. It's going to sound weird because mushroom clouds, of course, always are associated with nuclear destruction. They're not positive seeming images, but this one seems a bit different. To me, this one seems rather positive. So I wonder really if this might have some similarities to the concept of the Tower, because of course the Tower is a card that is often about seemingly negative situations and experiences that create a kind of a restructuring of our perceptions. And so, it's not inconceivable that one could see this as a card that is about understanding how to restructure things for ourselves. So Cilla says, in terms of interpretations, one interpretation, if you draw this card, is to think about eternity versus transience, like the colours of a bubble bath, extraordinarily beautiful but so brief. Some visions are transient and can never be held. Like the bubbles, the world we see in the 7th dimension seem ephemeral, a challenging concept for us given our usual Western need to have and hold. If, however, you can hold the vision lightly, like an iridescent bubble, the 7th dimension offers the vision of an opening into a new world, the quintessence perhaps. So again, that to me does sort of smack of the idea of restructuring. Okay, let's move on. So this is the 8th dimension, and the 8th dimension presents us with pure, unadulterated beauty, albeit beauty that we can only describe in similes. You may see it as a lotus flower, a fountain, love. And so she's talking here about the soft, ethereal nature of beauty. And she says about that, she says, the colours are soft, ethereal, accompanied, as in all these higher dimensions, by music that shifts and builds and grows as the flower expands and blossoms. T.S. Eliot could have been describing such music in the 4 quartets when he wrote, "Music that is heard so deeply that it is not heard at all, but you are the music while the music lasts." This dimension is a maze of vibration and light, exquisite, powerful. It allows us to move freely through the multidimensional energy levels, becoming one with the Devic beings who hold the blueprints of creation as the energy flows around and through us. And here she's reminding us, in terms of interpretation, that the higher the dimension, the more you can lift your awareness into the unknown, by following your heart's desire and sensitivity and intuition, by letting your feelings flow through without hindrance, by allowing a sense of the music of the spheres to sing through your blood. Then lovely, soft, light-based images here with the 9th dimension. This dimension may seem at first glance to be a soft pink and blue, misty circular shape in some undefined space. If we look closer, though, we glimpse the possibility of grass and temples with a sinuous swirl of light leading up into the circle of luminosity that surrounds the central space. It could be here that souls travel as they move up the dimensions from physical life into spirit, as there is a theory that after death we go through a period of learning or re-centering. So she relates this to the bardo of the Buddhists, or the Christian purgatory, perhaps. The image is, of course, a 3-dimensional attempt to depict a stream of pure energy where everything is being brought into possibility. Here, the devas emerge from the higher layers and begin their work of manifestation down through the dimensions of creation. And she talks here for the first time, really, about the angels. So here she says, "Here the angelics and others sing their paeans of love, the sound vibrating through all the dimensions of the infinite possibilities of cosmic consciousness," which we're moving towards. This card interpretively is seen to relate to our highest dreams. Very powerful. And here, again, a first impression for me, I instantly see a figure. This is the 10th dimension. This realm is impossible to grasp if we try to see through our everyday eyes. There are flickers of light similar to those sometimes seen out of the corner of our eyes, hints of energy in motion. Further down the image we see that there are many of these haloed beings. So there's images within images here, and she talks about them being possibly angelics, devas, or possibly something other, which older traditions describe as a primal serpent or dragon that emerged from the original ocean of consciousness. That might be the figure that I feel I'm seeing. So this card is about connecting our energy directly to the source. And this card is the 11th dimension. This is the one called Cosmic Consciousness. The 11th dimension is depicted as an outpouring of light and energy set within a brilliant gold background. It might be seen as a multi-armed being similar to Shiva, although what cosmic consciousness would look like is of course anyone's guess, so I have just tried to show its immense potency. And what she says here is that through this vast consciousness, matter is formed through the transmutation of energy. Like Shiva, this being is both creator and destroyer, or at least it brings matter into existence, and later, as that matter shifts and changes, allows it to decay and metamorphose into some other kind of energy, although we've no way of knowing what it is. And her suggestion here for interpretation is that if you find yourself with this card, the interpretations will centre about cosmic awareness and love. This is a love that enfolds and is the substance of every energy, each star and each human creature in the entire cosmos. Now, I just want to go back for a moment to the first dimension. And look at the contrast, all this colour and light and vibration and energy, and this void where things begin. And again, in mystical traditions, one of the things we learn, I mentioned it before, is the idea that something comes from nothing, and that reality is both things, everything that exists, and nothing at the same time. And particularly in the mystical traditions, you see this this kind of explanation being put forward, quite often, and it can be difficult to grasp. And even if we look at mystical traditions or spiritual traditions, there are those that seem to be more about trying to connect with the, if you like, the undifferentiated vastness, and others that are interested in connecting with this kind of higher cosmic consciousness. So this is a very, simplistic overview, but I did hear 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙩 use something similar, so I don't feel too bad for using this comparison. He pointed out that there are some systems like meditation and mindfulness and so on, and the non-dual traditions, which are about the direct path to this kind of unity, this kind of formlessness from which all forms arise. And then there are others like Kabbalah and ceremonial magic that are more about trying to connect up through the different layers of creation to get to this kind of cosmic consciousness. Ultimately, we're talking about the same thing, but just in different perspectives, different kind of views. So this cosmic consciousness is about taking us back to who and what we all really are at source, which is we all come from the same beginning, the same source. There is not a multitude of sources. There is this kind of one point source from which the multitude of creation comes. So Cilla ends the interpretation of this one saying, the interpretation of the card is being aware that you are part of ultimate reality, the world soul expanding into its full creativity, joy and fulfillment. It can also be about reconnection with each other, with the divine, and with all that is. Okay, so those are the 11 dimensions, and I'm going to be a bit quicker in going through the rest of them. Some of them I am literally just going to tell you what they are called, and others I'll pause and I'll say something about them. I will say something about this one simply because it is the angelics, and we mentioned them earlier. So, like the devas, the angelics can take on the simulacra of physical form, but their natural form is pure energy, ancient energy that existed well before the formation of first universe. If we could see the natural form of the angelics, if natural is the correct word for such energy beings, we might see them as huge clouds of feeling and piercing intelligence. While both devas and angelics are similar, they are all multidimensional energy beings. The angelics can be in many different dimensions simultaneously, while the devas, holding both archetypes and blueprints of all physical universes, are more attuned to manifestation of the material. And then the interpretation of this card would be, you've been touched in some way by the higher vibrational beings of cosmic creations. So that's the angelics. So moving now into the next phase, this card represents the devas themselves, and Cilla says here that like the angelics, which we just saw, the devas can move freely through and within the dimensions. We experience them as the wind or the swirling power of clouds or water, or music heard thundering through our blood in a storm. We can see them in the myriad stunning ways that consciousness explores itself from a leaf to a star. In addition, like the angelics, the devas can manifest as physical entities when they wish. You may be fortunate enough to encounter one in human form, someone who exhibits a wondrous beauty and luminosity, or you may have a more psychic sense to see or feel the devas as they pass through our dimension. And this card is a personal invitation to connect with the devas, to see if they have anything to say to you. To do so, you just have to walk outside and consciously connect to the earth, if possible in bare feet. After a while, notice anything you think is calling you. A glint of sunlight on leaves, an interesting stone, an insect, or, raising your eyes, the clouds, birdsong, starlight, or even the sun. Stay with whatever has caught your attention, and if this feels right, ask what it wants to tell you. The messages are as varied as whatever has called to you. Working in tandem with the devas, is essential. They need our physical existence and our awareness to bring about the changes necessary in the universe. Okay. This card is Vibrations. This card, number 15, is Light, Dark and Love. This card, number 16, is Deep Magic. This card, I feel an immediate emotional warmth from this card. Presence. The Deva of Presence is an angelic being that may transport itself through the dimensions to visit us at all times. It is not afraid to expand its soft, blue-tinged, feathered wings to their fullest extent, lightening the world with its presence. We see only a portion of this radiant being, as to encounter it in its entire potency could have us shaking for days. And then she talks about stories of people, finding and seeing angels. We can see this being as a protector and guide, although we should be aware that we are peripheral to its presence. This doesn't sit too well with us. We like to think we're the centre of existence, but these beings are part of a very different reality. The reminder here is to come back into your own centre. Stop, breathe, listen, and lighten up with a sense that anything is possible and everything is fine, to paraphrase Julian of Norwich. This card, number 18, is Synchronicity. Number 19 is The Way. Number 20, Journeying. Number 21 is Trust. This is the one that I showed you in the book, Manifestation. Another one that just chimes with me. Possibly, it's interesting, isn't it? I suppose, or I'm sure that as we go through this, many of you are, locking on to a particular card, and that will say something about where you are in your current process. So this one is Creative Stillness. Now, where I am in my current process is in a very busy creative time. So I'm working on a couple of books, I've been working on a course, I'm going to be giving some presentations and speeches in the near future. I'm putting together a new coaching program, all kinds of creative things are happening. So again, this just kind of chimes with me. And not surprisingly, it says drawing this card suggests that you need space and time to yourself. Make time to go for a walk on your own, or make a space or time off limit to everyone else if you can. I will take that to heart. This card, somebody's peeking through at me. Perception. Cilla mentioned that this card is based loosely on cubist kind of art. The firmament. Wonderful spiral again here. This one is nature, and you can see lots of animal details in there. Life force comes next. Dawn. Twilight. The Wisdom Keepers. Authenticity. The Subconscious. Excuse me while I turn the pages of the book. Blocks. So we're moving into now some of the kind of limitations, if you like, the mind-made limitations, or experiential limitations that we face as human beings. So this one is blocks. This one is grief, number 34. The image shows a being bowed down in pain and sorrow, its translucent wings spread out before it. The figure appears to be encased in a large transparent globe, perhaps our world, perhaps another, and we may wonder for which world the figure is grieving. Is this ours, lost forever, or some other universe? And, as John Donne says, therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. This is our universe, our grief. Every lost world is mourned by the Devas, each possibility, every life, however small. A blade of grass carelessly crushed underfoot would be held and tended to see if it can be healed. The manifest universe is infinitely precious to them at least. The wondrous and inexplicable gift of life itself is a miracle about which we have forgotten to marvel. You'll have been an unusual person if you have not been marked, if not shattered, by the loss of someone precious. You know life goes on and it will get easier, all the usual platitudes. And yes, life does go on and it does get a bit easier, but you will never be the same again. This loss will almost certainly have changed you, deepened you, into someone who can empathise, feel the emotions of others through to your deepest selves. Without that, you might always have stayed shallow. The trick is somehow to continue feeling. Some of us harden up after profound loss, losing any possibility of empathy. Some close down after life repeatedly forces them to become inhumane, or, for instance, soldiers in war. Allowing yourself to stay vulnerable, to feel all the conflicting emotions coursing through you, you remain alive. Closing down means a little death before time. This one is shame and remorse. Hubris, arrogance. Greed. Wow, that is such a powerful image. It speaks for itself, doesn't it? Lies and malice. We had lies and malice, which are number 38. Number 39 is this one, reminiscent of the first card, if you remember. This is obviously a picture of, or it seems to be a picture of the Earth, but with this kind of shroud over it. And this card is in fact called the Shadow. Then we have spinning, number 40. 41, the last fish. I won't read the detailed description here, but the interpretations. Fish often symbolise abundance and good luck. The fish was sacred to the Greeks, Druids and ancient Hindus, where it meant change and transformation. In Christianity, it is a symbol of abundance and faith. In more recent times, of course, fishing has become a contentious issue, particularly as we think about overfishing and ocean die-offs. Interpretation could be a person or creature out of its element. At times we find ourselves flailing about like a fish out of water. Finding your element isn't just about whether you're an earthy or watery person. For instance, if you need to be surrounded by beauty, but all you can see are grimy streets, you'll be struggling. If you're trying to swim against the current, you'll make little headway. The last tree. The last bee. And clearly what we're seeing here is a sequence of the outer manifestation of the kind of limited thinking that we saw earlier, the greed and malice and the shadow and that kind of negative self-thought and misperception of ourselves and others and of the whole world leads to unfortunate and unpleasant manifestations, including the danger to ourselves and to nature. The last B. But then what comes next is global healing. Global healing is about connection, says Cilla. I used to be dubious about the New Age penchant for standing hand in hand, singing songs and imagining blessings flowing out, until I read about the effects this has in, for example, healing groups. Just as our daily dose of negativity from the media affects us and our collective unconscious, see card 39, so we can counterbalance this with the healing, positive energy that is far more powerful than we realise. We may feel affected by the people around us who broadcast their subconscious fears, inhibitions, greed and anger out into the ether. The more empathic and sensitive you are, the more you'll feel these emotions. You can balance yourself by acknowledging them and then supporting yourself in whatever way works for you. Any form of creativity, paint, charcoal, singing, dancing, writing, works well to express your feelings, especially if you reflect on it impartially later. The interpretations of this card are both global and personal. Painted just before the COVID-19 virus became a global pandemic, it now seems particularly relevant as the need to connect and to heal the earth. We are a strange species, gifted and cursed, with both the awareness and ambivalence that makes us so dangerous. Having said that, humans used to live in harmony with their environment, and our nature has not changed so radically that we would find it impossible now. The prevailing paradigm of money and overwhelming selfishness has pushed us along a desperately destructive path, but most intelligent people are capable of turning away from such damaging ways. Personally, I don't believe that will be enough. We'll need firm leadership and positive action to reverse the mess we've made. Fortunately, this is beginning to happen in a few countries. And just a comment that Cilla makes, you'll notice that this earth has this kind of the dots around it and the kind of mist around it and so on, a corona, in fact, a corona as you often get around the sun and the moon and other planets. And she says in the book, the similarity between the corona and the coronavirus itself was unintended, but it is an interesting coincidence nevertheless. I'll leave you to wonder about its significance. Dimension shift. Dreaming the new world. The possible human. And then finally, through the veil. Here, a strange translucent tunnel offers us a new and mysterious path, and looking up into it, we may imagine ourselves floating upward into the space or place in the unknown beyond. Or we might be given the choice to stay here. There are many stories about people dying and then returning, near-death experiences, and most talk about floating up through a tunnel until they reach a place of light and joy. They encounter people they've loved in the past or even in the future. They wander through beautiful gardens or are welcomed by an angelic being only to be told that they need to return. Quite a few people report that they float up into the corner of the room watching doctors attempting to resuscitate their bodies. One woman even told nurses that she'd moved outside and up and reported seeing an old tennis shoe on the roof. When the nurses checked, the shoe was there, invisible from below. It might be good to think that, as T.S. Eliot said, we've at last come back to the beginning, and now, as fully conscious beings, we'll know the place for the first time. But my preference would be to move on through the veil, into the light of the greatest mystery, the light of the source. We have been through the mill with the DEVAS standing by us, offering a helping hand as we falter or fail to understand yet again. And they have also been encouraging some of us to take the greatest step of all through into the greatest mystery. Incidentally, Cilla has a forthcoming book and deck called the Book of the Dead. It's an oracle, and she indicates here that she'll be saying more about this greatest mystery in that. Even as we as individuals disappear into the next life to discover what lies beyond, or return to nothing but cosmic dust once more, the Devas will continue their desire to partner with humanity, energy with conscious matter, working together to rebalance the universe. And then in the interpretation phase, she says, so when you draw this card, see the colours, textures. This is the card that looks so amazingly textured, I mentioned before, and the swirls of movement drawing you into the highest mystery as you gradually move up into the place where all ambiguities and all paradoxes disappear. Now you understand fully without trying, know without conscious thought, and see what your eyes cannot, here in three-dimensional space. As the veil parts to allow you to enter into this ultimate mystery, you reach a place beyond all words, where everything you know disappears and yet becomes more real than anything you've ever experienced. As you merge and dissolve into this unknown realm, which is at the same time the place you've always known, you've come home. Reading the card will be about transformation, death and rebirth, experience, union, and dissolution. So that, my friend, is the wonderful multi-dimensional Devas deck by Cilla Conway. I hope you've enjoyed this walkthrough and review. I think it's a marvellously powerful deck. I think it works both as an oracle that we can engage with in a kind of intuitive, abstract way, but also as a very interesting meditation on the nature of reality, cosmic consciousness, the great mystery, and how we are connected to it and how we can work with it. I'm particularly attracted to that idea. My tarot coaching model, the ACEs model, those of you who have either taken my Tarot Coach Session Success Workshop or have looked at the free ACEs coaching workshop that's on my YouTube channel will understand that that model talks very much about the connection between, if you like, mundane reality and also that great mystery, and how we can actually work within the boundaries of that mystery, although we may not fully understand it, in co-creative ways and ways that move us forward. And I think this deck does a really good job of reminding us of that. Just a reminder that I will be posting my interview with Cilla. So if you're watching this video as soon as it goes up, look out for that interview with Cilla, that conversation with Cilla coming very soon. And if you're watching this video after I've posted that, then the link to that interview will be below, and I think you'll find that conversation really interesting and illuminating, particularly if you've enjoyed and want to know more about this deck. So until next time, I'll see you soon, and let's go in to the mystery.